In the stillness of night, let us begin our journey into one of the most influential civilizations in history, the Roman Empire. Before it became an empire of emperors and legions, Rome was little more than a collection of modest settlements along the Tiber River, cloaked in myth, shaped by ambition, and hardened through resilience and conflict. The origin of Rome is rooted in legend, though archaeology provides its own quieter testimony. According to Roman mythology, the city was founded in 753 BCE by Romulus, who, along with his twin brother Remus, had been suckled by a she-wolf in infancy. Passed down for centuries, this story was more than a fable. It became a cultural anchor, a tale of divine destiny and survival against the odds. The truth, however, appears to be more gradual and grounded. Archaeological evidence suggests that by the 10th century BCE, small communities had formed on the Palatine Hill and the surrounding areas. These early settlers were influenced by both the Etruscans to the north and the Greek colonies to the south. The Etruscans, in particular, left a deep imprint on early Roman religion, architecture, and political structure. By the 7th century BCE, these scattered hilltop villages began to coalesce into a single urban entity. Rome was transforming. Early kings like Numa Pompilius and Servius Tullius were credited with laying essential foundations. Numa with peace and religious order, Servius with political reform, and the first census. The Romans believed that these kings provided structure to what had been a tribal landscape. Rome's monarchy was not eternal. Around 509 BCE, the Romans overthrew their final king, Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Proud, whose reign was marked by arrogance and disregard for Roman custom. His expulsion ushered in the Roman Republic, a system of governance built not around kingship, but around elected officials, a senate, and popular assemblies. For Romans, this transition symbolized a victory of collective will over tyranny. Yet the Republic in its infancy was fragile. It faced external threats from neighboring tribes such as the Latins, Sabines, and Etruscans. Internally, deep divisions existed between the patricians, the aristocratic elite, and the plebeians, the common citizens. These social tensions would define the Republic's early years. Military campaigns dominated Rome's early centuries. War was both a necessity and a means of survival. Victories brought land, slaves, and wealth, but also new responsibilities, namely, how to integrate conquered peoples and maintain control over expanding territory. One of the most important internal struggles was known as the conflict of the orders. The plebeians demanded greater political rights and protection from the patrician magistrates. This long-standing tension led to significant reforms, including the creation of the office of the tribune of the plebs, officials who could veto legislation that harmed the lower classes. Roman politics were pragmatic and reactive. Institutions evolved through necessity. In 451 BCE, the 12 Tables were created, a written code of laws that applied to all citizens. Though harsh by modern standards, these laws introduced the idea of legal transparency and equality before the law. By the end of the 4th century BCE, Rome had become the dominant power in central Italy. Through a combination of military strength, colonization, and diplomacy, it brought the Latin and Etruscan cities into its sphere of influence. The foundations of a republic, military, legal, religious, and civic, were now firmly established. Religion in early Rome was deeply tied to public life. Rituals, sacrifices, and omens were seen as vital to the state's well-being. Priests, augurs, and religious officials played a central role in decision-making. Temples and altars became focal points in the growing city, while festivals reinforced a shared sense of identity. Rome's infrastructure also began to take shape. Streets were paved, drainage systems were laid, and public spaces like the Forum emerged as hubs for political and commercial activity. The Cloaca Maxima, Rome's first major sewer, stood as a testament to early Roman engineering and public works. Culturally, early Republican Rome was cautious but adaptable. Romans valued tradition, what they called mos maiorum, the customs of the ancestors. Yet they were not opposed to adopting useful practices from others. Greek art, literature, and ideas were increasingly absorbed and reinterpreted in Roman terms. Education remained within the family. Fathers taught sons about law, agriculture, and warfare. Daughters learned domestic duties. Literacy was limited, primarily among the elite, and oral tradition dominated public discourse. The army grew alongside the Republic. The citizen soldier became a cornerstone of Roman strength. Military service was considered a civic duty and a path to political and social mobility. Triumphs on the battlefield could elevate a family's status and open the door to higher office. By the 3rd century BCE, Rome was no longer a regional power, but a republic on the verge of continental ambition. Its structures, both material and institutional, would enable centuries of expansion and governance. Rome's rise from myth to republic is a tale of persistence and adaptability. Built on struggle, negotiation, and reform, early Rome was not merely a city but an evolving idea, one that would reshape the world. As Rome emerged from the shadow of its kings and stepped into the uncertain light of republicanism, it found itself facing a world of both opportunity and danger. The early republic, established after the expulsion of the last king around 509 BCE, was a complex system of power sharing designed to prevent the return of monarchy. But it was also a state in transition, expanding its reach, refining its laws, and forging an identity through war, diplomacy, and civic development. At the heart of the Roman Republic was its political architecture. The Senate, a body of elder statesmen initially composed of patricians, held advisory authority but soon came to dominate state policy. Though technically not a legislative body, its decisions, senatus consulta, carried immense weight. Alongside the Senate were the popular assemblies and annually elected magistrates, most notably the consuls. These two consuls, chosen each year, shared executive power and commanded Rome's armies. This system, with its checks and balances, was born out of fear. Fear of tyranny, fear of concentrated power, and fear of internal collapse. Rome's political evolution did not occur in isolation. It was forged in the crucible of external threats. Throughout the 5th and 4th centuries BCE, the Republic fought a series of wars with neighboring Latin, Etruscan, Volscian, and Samnite peoples. These conflicts were brutal and frequent, but they also served to hone Rome's military, political, and administrative capabilities. One of the most transformative conflicts of this period was the series of Samnite Wars. Spanning nearly 50 years, these wars tested Rome's resilience and adaptability. The Samnites, fierce and mobile warriors from the mountainous interior, proved formidable adversaries. Rome responded by reorganizing its military structure. The Manipular Legion, an innovation allowing more flexible and responsive troop formations, replaced the older, rigid phalanx model. This shift marked a turning point in Roman military efficiency and laid the groundwork for future conquests. Victory in the Samnite Wars expanded Roman control over central and southern Italy, but with expansion came integration. Rome was remarkable in its ability to incorporate conquered peoples into its system. Instead of mass enslavement or exile, many communities were offered varying degrees of Roman citizenship, military alliances, and local autonomy in exchange for loyalty and tribute. This pragmatic approach fostered a sense of unity and created a vast network of allies that would later support Rome in larger conflicts. Internally, the Republic continued to evolve. The long-standing struggle between patricians and plebeians, known as the conflict of the orders, resulted in significant constitutional reforms. By the 3rd century BCE, plebeians had gained access to most major political offices, including the consulship. Laws such as the Lex Hortensia in 287 BCE, which made the decisions of the plebeian assembly binding on all citizens, helped level the playing field between the two classes. While true equality was never fully achieved, these reforms helped stabilize the Republic and broaden its base of support. Civic life in Rome was deeply intertwined with military service. Rome did not have a standing army in the modern sense. Instead, military service was considered a duty of all eligible male citizens. Each year, as consuls were elected, so too were armies raised for campaigns. Veterans returned home to farms and trades, bringing with them wealth, spoils, and often a broadened perspective. War was not only a means of survival, it was a path to status, wealth, and political opportunity. This culture of militarism would be tested as Rome entered the international stage with its first major overseas conflict, the Punic Wars. These wars, fought between Rome and Carthage, would define the Republic's future and transform it from a regional power into a Mediterranean superstate. The First Punic War began in 264 BCE over control of Sicily. Carthage, a powerful maritime empire based in North Africa, had long dominated trade and naval activity in the Western Mediterranean. Rome, traditionally a land power, was new to naval warfare. But true to form, Rome adapted quickly. By reverse engineering captured Carthaginian ships and inventing the corvus, a boarding bridge that turned sea battles into infantry clashes, Rome secured key victories and eventually forced Carthage to cede Sicily. The victory came at great cost. Rome had never before fought such a prolonged and resource-intensive war. It had to develop naval infrastructure, train new kinds of soldiers, and stretch its treasury. But the war also taught Rome an invaluable lesson. It could project power far beyond the Italian peninsula. Sicily became Rome's first overseas province, and with it came the challenge of managing distant territories. Tensions between Rome and Carthage remained high, and within a generation, conflict erupted again. The Second Punic War, 218–201 BCE, was perhaps the most famous of Rome's early wars, due in large part to the genius of the Carthaginian general Hannibal Barca. Hannibal's crossing of the Alps with elephants remains one of the most daring military feats in history. His victories at Trebia, Lake Trasimene, and Cannae shocked the Roman world and brought Rome to the brink of collapse. But Rome did not yield. Its response was measured, patient, and strategic. The Senate refused to negotiate with Hannibal. It adopted a war of attrition, avoiding direct battles and focusing on cutting off Hannibal's supplies and support. Eventually, the Roman general Scipio Africanus took the war to Carthaginian soil, defeating Hannibal at the Battle of Zama in 202 BCE. The Second Punic War ended with Rome as the undisputed master of the Western Mediterranean. The consequences of these wars were profound. Rome gained control over Spain, much of North Africa, and the Western Seas. The Republic now had a true empire in all but name. But with these gains came new challenges: governing diverse peoples, maintaining distant armies, and managing unprecedented wealth. These external conquests began to alter the internal dynamics of the Republic. The Senate became increasingly powerful, yet also more corrupt and factionalized. Military victories enriched a small elite, while the rural poor, often absent in long campaigns, saw their farms decline and their economic security vanish. A new class of landless citizens, proletarii, began to emerge, setting the stage for future unrest. Despite these undercurrents, the 2nd century BCE was a period of triumph. Roads were built across provinces, Roman colonies established new centers of Roman culture, and Latin spread across the Mediterranean. Temples and monuments rose in Rome to commemorate victories. The Republic had matured into a power of unprecedented scale. But the very tools that had enabled Rome's rise, its flexible military, its pragmatic politics, and its capacity for integration, would soon be tested under the strain of empire. In the chapters to come, we will explore how the Republic, at the height of its power, began to unravel under the weight of ambition, inequality, and civil war. By the beginning of the 1st century BCE, the Roman Republic stood as the most powerful political entity in the Mediterranean. Its armies had conquered vast territories, its wealth flowed from foreign provinces, and its culture had spread from Spain to Syria. Yet, beneath the surface of imperial triumph, the foundations of the Republic were cracking. The institutions that had sustained Roman governance for centuries were increasingly unable to manage the pressures of expansion, economic disparity, and political ambition. The next chapter of Rome's history would not be one of conquest abroad, but of conflict within. One of the central problems of the late Republic was the widening gap between rich and poor. The spoils of Rome's military successes flowed disproportionately to the aristocracy. Large estates, latifundia, grew across Italy, often worked by slaves captured in foreign wars. Meanwhile, small farmers, the traditional backbone of Rome's citizen soldier class, found themselves displaced, indebted, and increasingly dependent on state handouts. This economic imbalance fueled political unrest. Reformers like the Gracchi brothers, Tiberius and Gaius, attempted to address the crisis through land redistribution and social legislation. Tiberius, elected tribune of the plebs in 133 BCE, proposed laws to limit the size of estates and redistribute land to the poor. His efforts, though popular among the masses, outraged the Senate. Tiberius was killed in a violent confrontation, an act that marked a dangerous shift in Roman politics. A decade later, his brother Gaius met a similar fate. Their deaths revealed a new reality. Political violence had become an accepted tool. The Senate, once a body of deliberation, now sanctioned or tolerated murder in defense of privilege. Rome's political arena turned increasingly volatile, and the use of mobs, militias, and intimidation became routine. Amid this unrest, military generals began to gain extraordinary influence. The traditional system in which citizen soldiers fought for the Republic gave way to a new model. Soldiers whose primary loyalty was to their commander, not the state. This transformation would have catastrophic consequences. Lucius Cornelius Sulla was the first to march his army on Rome itself in 88 BCE, defying legal and moral precedent. He sought control of the state in the name of restoring order, and after a brutal civil war, he installed himself as dictator. During his rule, Sulla implemented reforms intended to strengthen the Senate and weaken popular assemblies. But his legacy was one of bloodshed and precedent, proof that power could be seized by force. In the decades that followed, other ambitious men would walk the path Sulla had cleared. Among them were Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, Pompey the Great, and Gaius Julius Caesar. Pompey rose to prominence through military success in the East, defeating pirates and conquering lands in Asia Minor and the Levant. He returned to Rome a celebrated general, but struggled to convert his battlefield glory into lasting political authority. His alliance with Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest man in Rome, and Julius Caesar, a rising political star, led to the formation of the first triumvirate in 60 BCE, a private agreement to dominate Roman politics. Each member of the triumvirate had something to gain. Crassus sought influence and prestige. Pompey wanted land for his veterans and Senate approval of his Eastern arrangements. Caesar desired military command and political advancement. Through careful coordination, they achieved their goals, temporarily. Julius Caesar, appointed governor of Gaul in 58 BCE, would prove the most ambitious of the three. Over the next decade, he conducted a brutal and brilliant campaign of conquest across Gaul, amassing both immense wealth and the undying loyalty of his legions. His Commentari de Bello Gallico, his account of the Gallic Wars, was not only a military chronicle but a piece of political propaganda, solidifying his image as Rome's greatest general. While Caesar's star rose in the north, tensions back in Rome deepened. Crassus was killed in 53 BCE during a disastrous campaign in Parthia, and Pompey, now aligned with the Senate, viewed Caesar with suspicion. In 49 BCE, the Senate, encouraged by Pompey, ordered Caesar to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. Instead, Caesar crossed the Rubicon River with his legion, a symbolic act of rebellion, and uttered the fateful words, "Alea iacta est," the die is cast. Civil war erupted. Caesar advanced quickly, forcing Pompey and the Senate to flee to Greece. At the Battle of Pharsalus in 48 BCE, Caesar decisively defeated Pompey's forces. Pompey fled to Egypt, where he was assassinated, an act that shocked even Caesar. Now the undisputed master of Rome, Caesar returned home to enact sweeping reforms. He redistributed land, restructured debt, expanded the Senate, and initiated a calendar reform that gave us the Julian calendar. Though he declined the title of king, he accepted the lifelong position of dictator perpetuo, dictator for life. To many Romans, especially traditionalists in the Senate, this was intolerable. On the Ides of March in 44 BCE, Caesar was assassinated by a group of senators led by Brutus and Cassius. They claimed to be defending the Republic, but in reality they had opened the floodgates to further instability. Caesar's death did not restore the Republic. Instead, it plunged Rome into another series of civil wars. The power vacuum left behind was quickly filled by new figures: Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal general; Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir; and Lepidus, a lesser but still influential politician. Together they formed the Second Triumvirate, vowing to punish Caesar's assassins and stabilize the Republic. The assassins fled and were defeated at the Battle of Philippi in 42 BCE. But unity among the triumvirs was short-lived. Conflicts of ambition and ideology drove them apart. Eventually, it came down to Octavian and Antony. Antony allied himself with Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt, further alarming Roman opinion. In 31 BCE, their forces clashed at the Battle of Actium. Octavian emerged victorious, and both Antony and Cleopatra took their own lives. With his rivals gone, Octavian stood alone. In 27 BCE, he formally offered to surrender power to the Senate, but the gesture was largely symbolic. The Senate bestowed upon him the title Augustus, the revered one, and thus began the Roman Empire. The Republic had died, not in a single moment, but through decades of erosion. Its systems had buckled under the weight of military ambition, social inequality, and political violence. What remained was a new order, still Roman in name, but fundamentally changed. The story of Caesar, Pompey, and the fall of the Republic is one of ambition, betrayal, and irreversible transformation. It is the story of how a republic born from kings became an empire born from civil war. In the next chapter, we will follow Augustus and the establishment of imperial Rome, a new era of stability, grandeur, and absolute power. With the defeat of Mark Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE and the suicides that followed, the Roman world stood at a crossroads. The civil wars that had plagued the late Republic for decades were over. The Senate still existed, the Republican offices remained, but true power rested with one man, Gaius Octavius, better known to history as Augustus. In 27 BCE, Octavian ceremonially returned his powers to the Senate, a calculated performance that emphasized his respect for traditional institutions. In return, the Senate granted him unprecedented authority and the honorary title Augustus, meaning the revered one. It was the beginning of a new political structure, the Principate, in which Augustus ruled as princeps, or first citizen, maintaining the facade of republican governance while exercising imperial control. Augustus understood the necessity of legitimacy. Where Julius Caesar had alarmed the Senate with overt power-grabbing, Augustus cloaked his rule in the language of tradition, modesty, and restoration. He styled himself not as a king, but as a servant of the Republic, a bringer of peace and order after decades of chaos. His political genius lay in stabilizing Rome without overtly dismantling its republican past. One of his first priorities was to reform the military. Augustus reduced the size of the legions, discharging tens of thousands of soldiers and settling many on land grants throughout the empire. He established a standing professional army, loyal to the emperor rather than the Senate, and introduced regular salaries and pensions. The Praetorian Guard, an elite unit tasked with protecting the emperor, was also created during this period. These reforms helped ensure loyalty and reduce the likelihood of future military uprisings. By securing the army, Augustus secured his rule. Domestically, Augustus embarked on an ambitious program of social, moral, and administrative reform. He restored old temples, revived traditional religious festivals, and promoted conservative family values. Laws were passed to encourage marriage, penalize adultery, and promote childbirth among the Roman elite. These efforts were framed as a return to Rome's ancestral values, a moral revival that paralleled political renewal. Augustus also restructured provincial administration. He divided the provinces into two categories, senatorial and imperial. The former were relatively peaceful and governed by Senate-appointed officials, while the latter, often border territories requiring military presence, remained under the emperor's control. This arrangement gave Augustus effective authority over most of the army and the empire's strategic frontiers, while allowing the Senate to retain a sense of dignity and participation. In terms of infrastructure and urban development, Augustus famously claimed that he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. He invested in aqueducts, roads, temples, and public buildings. The Ara Pacis, or Altar of Peace, became a powerful symbol of the Augustan age, celebrating peace achieved through strength and divine favor. Art, literature, and architecture flourished under Augustus's patronage. The works of Virgil, Horace, Livy, and Ovid helped craft a new Roman cultural identity. Virgil's Aeneid, an epic tracing Rome's origins to the hero Aeneas, provided a mythological foundation for the Augustan regime, linking his rule to destiny and divine will. Through literature and monumental architecture, Augustus shaped not just policy, but memory and imagination. Peace, Pax Romana, was one of Augustus's greatest achievements. For the first time in centuries, Rome experienced sustained internal stability. The frontiers were secure, piracy diminished, trade expanded, and provinces grew increasingly integrated into the imperial system. A traveler could journey from Hispania to Syria on well-maintained roads under the protection of Roman law. But Augustus's reign was not without challenges. Conspiracies and plots persisted, often from within his own family. The question of succession haunted his later years. Though he had absolute power, there was no clear legal framework for passing it on. Augustus adopted several potential heirs, including his grandsons Gaius and Lucius, but both died young. Eventually, his stepson Tiberius was named his successor. In 14 CE, Augustus died at the age of 75. His passing marked the end of an era. The Senate deified him, and he was officially declared Divus Augustus, a god. Statues and temples were erected in his honor, and his image appeared across coins and inscriptions throughout the empire. Augustus left behind a transformed Rome. The Republic, though still spoken of with reverence, was functionally dead. In its place stood a new system, imperial in structure, autocratic in power, but cloaked in republican tradition. Augustus had carefully crafted an empire where stability, legitimacy, and prosperity were inseparable from his own persona. His rule set a template that later emperors would follow, some wisely, others disastrously. But none would forget the example he left behind. The man who turned civil war into order, disorder into peace, and a wounded republic into a global empire. In the next chapter, we will explore the emperors who followed in his footsteps, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, and Nero, and the ways in which the empire began to strain under the weight of absolute power. With the death of Augustus in 14 CE, the Roman Empire faced its first true test, the peaceful transfer of power from one emperor to the next. Augustus had carefully prepared his stepson, Tiberius, to assume authority, but the process of succession remained informal and fragile. What followed was a period of experimentation, consolidation, and, eventually, chaos, an era shaped by complex personalities, private ambition, and public spectacle. Tiberius, though an able administrator and experienced general, never enjoyed the popularity or charisma of his predecessor. A reserved and often melancholic figure, he lacked the theatrical flair that had helped Augustus build consensus. Early in his reign, Tiberius sought to continue the policies of stability and reform, preserving much of Augustus's institutional framework. He maintained fiscal discipline, supported the army, and avoided costly foreign adventures. However, Tiberius grew increasingly reclusive. In 26 CE, he withdrew from Rome altogether, retreating to the island of Capri and leaving much of the daily governance in the hands of Lucius Aelius Sejanus, the ambitious head of the Praetorian Guard. Sejanus abused his position, orchestrating purges against perceived rivals and concentrating power in his own hands. His rise alarmed the Senate and court elites, and in 31 CE, he was arrested and executed on Tiberius's orders. The later years of Tiberius's reign were marked by paranoia, treason trials, and a breakdown in trust between the emperor and the senatorial class. When Tiberius died in 37 CE, Rome was relieved, but uncertain about what would come next. The answer came in the form of Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, better known as Caligula. The great-grandson of Augustus and the son of the beloved General Germanicus, Caligula was welcomed with overwhelming enthusiasm. His early months as emperor were marked by generosity, public games, and tax relief. The Roman people believed they had found a new golden age, but the promise was short-lived. Caligula soon descended into erratic and autocratic behavior. Ancient sources describe episodes of cruelty, extravagance, and delusion. Whether these accounts were exaggerated by senatorial hostility is debated, but it is clear that Caligula's reign marked a sharp departure from the careful balance Augustus had cultivated. He elevated his horse to the position of priest, declared himself a living god, and drained the treasury on spectacles and vanity projects. His behavior alienated the Senate, the military, and the Praetorian Guard. In 41 CE, Caligula was assassinated in a conspiracy led by members of his own guard, a reminder that imperial power, while immense, was never invulnerable. In the chaotic hours that followed his death, the Praetorians found and proclaimed a new emperor, Caligula's uncle, Claudius. The Senate, initially reluctant, acquiesced, and thus began the reign of a man few had ever expected to rule. Claudius, physically frail and previously marginalized due to a stammer and limp, proved to be a surprisingly competent and effective ruler. He expanded the empire significantly, most notably with the conquest of Britannia in 43 CE. He reformed the bureaucracy, improved the judicial system, and invested in public infrastructure, including aqueducts, roads, and harbors. Yet, Claudius's reign was also marked by palace intrigue. He married several times, and his final wife, Agrippina the Younger, secured the succession of her son from a previous marriage, Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, better known as Nero. Claudius died in 54 CE, likely poisoned, and Nero ascended the throne at the age of 16. The early years of Nero's rule, guided by his mother Agrippina, his tutor Seneca, and the Praetorian prefect Burrus, were relatively stable. Nero promoted the arts, reduced taxes, and avoided unnecessary military engagements. He was young, charming, and eager to please. But power transformed Nero. As he grew older, he sought independence from his advisors and mother. Agrippina's influence waned, and eventually, She was murdered, likely on Nero's orders. The deaths of Seneca and Burrus soon followed, and Nero was left to rule alone. Nero's reign devolved into a spectacle of self-indulgence and repression. He fancied himself an artist and actor, appearing on stage and forcing Rome's elite to attend his performances. He spent lavishly on palaces and entertainments, even as economic troubles loomed. In 64 CE, a great fire ravaged much of Rome. Though the cause remains unknown, rumors spread that Nero had ordered the blaze to clear space for his golden house, a vast and opulent palace complex. To deflect blame, he accused the Christians, a small and unpopular sect at the time. The resulting persecution was brutal and set a precedent for later imperial crackdowns. Despite these excesses, Nero retained the support of the lower classes for a time, thanks to public games and handouts. But unrest in the provinces and the army began to grow. In 68 CE, the governor of Hispania, Galba, declared rebellion. As other generals followed suit, Nero's support collapsed. Abandoned by the Senate and the Praetorians, Nero fled and ultimately took his own life. With Nero's death, the Julio-Claudian dynasty, founded by Augustus, came to an end. The Roman world plunged into civil war, and for the first time in nearly a century, there was no clear successor. The reigns of Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, and Nero illustrated the instability at the heart of the imperial system. Power was immense, but it lacked structure. Succession was murky, legitimacy fragile, and the role of emperor depended as much on personal charisma as institutional support. As we move into the next chapter, we will witness how Rome endured the year of the 4 emperors and found new strength under the Flavian dynasty, a family that would rebuild and redefine the empire after fire, madness, and collapse. In the wake of Nero's suicide in 68 CE, Rome entered a period of chaos and uncertainty. The emperor was dead, the Julio-Claudian line had ended, and no clear heir stood ready to claim the imperial mantle. What followed was one of the most turbulent years in Roman history, the year of the 4 emperors. The first to seize the moment was Galba, the governor of Hispania. Backed by the Senate and hailed as a restorer of republican virtue, Galba entered Rome with high hopes. But his rigid austerity and disregard for the military alienated the Praetorian Guard and legions alike. Within months, he was murdered by his own guardsmen. His successor, Otho, lasted only a few months. Though he had the support of Rome, he was opposed by Vitellius, a general backed by the legions in Germania. The two men clashed in civil war, and after defeat in battle, Otho took his own life, believing further bloodshed unworthy of the Republic. Vitellius entered Rome triumphantly, but quickly revealed himself to be an unfit ruler. His indulgent lifestyle, lack of discipline, and failure to secure the loyalty of other provinces left him vulnerable. Meanwhile, in the eastern provinces, a new contender rose, Titus Flavius Vespasianus, Vespasian, commander of Roman forces in Judea. Vespasian had military experience, administrative skill, and crucially, the backing of Egypt and the Eastern legions. His forces marched on Rome, and by the end of 69 CE, Vitellius was dead and Vespasian had assumed control. Thus began the Flavian dynasty, and with it, a return to stability. Vespasian's reign, 69-79 CE, was marked by restoration. The empire was exhausted, politically, economically, and emotionally. Vespasian set about repairing the damage. He restored discipline to the military, restructured the finances, and cracked down on corruption. Though not born into the aristocracy, he presented himself as a no-nonsense restorer of order, a contrast to Nero's flamboyance. To consolidate his rule, Vespasian engaged in visible public works. One of the most enduring symbols of this era is the construction of the Flavian Amphitheater, better known today as the Colosseum. Built on the site of Nero's former palace, it was a symbolic gesture, a return of space to the people. The Colosseum would become the centerpiece of Roman entertainment and civic pride. Vespasian also continued the war in Judea, which had erupted into full-scale rebellion under Nero. His son Titus led the final assault on Jerusalem in 70 CE, culminating in the destruction of the Second Temple, a moment of profound consequence for Jewish history. The victory brought prestige to the Flavian house and allowed for a triumphal celebration in Rome. Upon Vespasian's death in 79 CE, power passed smoothly to Titus, the first time in Roman history that an emperor was succeeded peacefully by his biological son. Though his reign was short, Titus was popular and capable. He dealt with a series of disasters, including the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 CE, which buried the cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum, and a major fire in Rome the following year. His generosity and leadership in the face of these crises endeared him to the public. Titus also completed the Colosseum and inaugurated it with 100 days of games, featuring gladiatorial combat, animal hunts, and mock naval battles. His reign, though only lasting 2 years, helped reinforce the legitimacy of hereditary succession and the stability of the Flavian line. In 81 CE, Titus died unexpectedly, and power passed to his younger brother Domitian. Domitian's reign, 81-96 CE, would prove more controversial. At first, he governed effectively, restoring the economy, strengthening the frontiers, and reforming the coinage. He was a tireless administrator and took his role as emperor seriously, referring to himself as Dominus et Deus, Lord and God. But Domitian's authoritarian style, growing paranoia, and persecution of the Senate led to growing resentment. He expanded the role of the imperial bureaucracy, sidelined senatorial influence, and relied increasingly on the army and secret police. Executions, exiles, and accusations of treason became common. Despite these autocratic tendencies, many provinces prospered under Domitian. His border campaigns in Britain and along the Danube reinforced Roman authority, and he invested in public building projects throughout the empire. But in Rome, the Senate seethed. In 96 CE, Domitian was assassinated in a palace conspiracy, an act quietly welcomed by much of the Roman elite. With his death, the Flavian dynasty ended, but the precedent it set, a firm, centralized rule backed by military strength and public works, had helped Rome recover from the excesses of the Julio-Claudian era. The Flavians had rebuilt Rome physically and politically, laying the groundwork for one of the most admired periods in Roman history, the age of the 5 good emperors. In the next chapter, we will follow the emperors who embodied Rome's golden age: Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius, and explore how a philosophy of duty, justice, and expansion defined the high point of imperial Rome. After the assassination of Domitian in 96 CE, the Roman Empire stood once again at a moment of transition. But this time it would not plunge into civil war. Instead, the Senate acted swiftly and deliberately, selecting a respected elder statesman, Marcus Cocceius Nerva, as emperor. With this decision, Rome entered what many historians regard as its greatest era, an age marked by stability, prosperity, and thoughtful governance, the time of the 5 good emperors. Nerva, already advanced in age, ruled for only 2 years. Yet his reign set an essential precedent: the adoption of a competent successor based on merit rather than bloodline. To secure loyalty from the army and stability in the provinces, Nerva adopted Trajan, a successful general with deep support among the legions. With that act, he established a new model for imperial succession, one that would be emulated by his successors to great effect. Trajan became emperor in 98 CE, and under his leadership, the Roman Empire reached its territorial zenith. A military man by training, Trajan embarked on ambitious campaigns in Dacia, modern-day Romania, culminating in the conquest of the Dacian kingdom. The spoils from this campaign, including vast gold reserves, helped fund extensive public building projects across the empire. Trajan's Forum, Basilica, and the famed Trajan's Column in Rome remain enduring symbols of this era's grandeur. But Trajan was more than a conqueror. He understood the importance of civic infrastructure, legal clarity, and social welfare. He initiated large-scale building programs, improved roads and aqueducts, and expanded the Alimenta, a state-sponsored welfare program providing food and support for poor children in Italy. His approach combined military might with civic responsibility, and he was deeply respected both by the Senate and the populace. Upon his death in 117 CE, Trajan had already named his successor, Hadrian, his cousin by marriage and an experienced administrator. Hadrian reversed some of Trajan's expansionist policies, abandoning overextended eastern territories in favor of consolidating and defending existing borders. His reign marked a shift from conquest to maintenance, a recognition that the empire's vastness required stability more than glory. Hadrian is best remembered for his travels. Rare among emperors, he journeyed extensively throughout the empire, inspecting fortifications, addressing local grievances, and overseeing infrastructure. He visited nearly every province, promoting Roman identity while respecting local cultures. One of his most famous projects was Hadrian's Wall in northern Britain, a fortified boundary meant to secure the empire's frontier from hostile tribes. Culturally inclined, Hadrian was a patron of the arts and architecture. He rebuilt the Pantheon in Rome, designed his own imperial villa in Tivoli, and surrounded himself with philosophers and poets. Yet his reign was not without tension. A major Jewish revolt in Judea, known as the Bar Kokhba Revolt, 132-136 CE, was brutally suppressed. The aftermath saw wide-scale destruction, mass displacement, and a reconfiguration of the province. Hadrian died in 138 CE, and his chosen successor, Antoninus Pius, ushered in one of the most tranquil periods in Roman history. His reign, lasting 23 years, was marked by internal peace, economic stability, and a deep respect for law and tradition. Unlike his predecessors, Antoninus never led a military campaign. He ruled from Italy, delegating authority to capable governors and maintaining harmonious relations with the Senate. Under Antoninus, Roman law was refined and standardized, provincial administration was improved, and the empire experienced few external threats. His long and uneventful reign became a model of responsible governance. He earned the title Pius for his loyalty to Hadrian's memory and for his consistent moderation in both policy and personal conduct. When Antoninus died in 161 CE, power passed smoothly to Marcus Aurelius, whom he had adopted and prepared for rule, and Lucius Verus, a co-emperor. This was an unusual arrangement, but one that initially worked well. Lucius focused on military campaigns in the east, while Marcus Aurelius remained in Rome and concentrated on administration and philosophy. Marcus Aurelius stands out among Roman emperors not just for his leadership, but for his intellect. A student of Stoic philosophy, he authored Meditations, a collection of personal reflections on duty, suffering, and moral clarity. His reign, however, was far from peaceful. The Antonine Plague, a devastating epidemic, swept through the empire, likely claiming millions of lives. Simultaneously, Rome faced renewed pressures on its northern frontiers, particularly from Germanic tribes along the Danube. Despite these challenges, Marcus Aurelius held firm. He spent much of his reign on military campaigns, living among the troops and ensuring the frontier was secure. His sense of duty and restraint earned him widespread admiration. He sought not glory but justice, and saw power as a burden to be carried with humility. Yet his greatest mistake may have been his succession plan. Unlike the previous good emperors, Marcus chose to pass the throne to his biological son, Commodus. With Marcus Aurelius's death in 180 CE, the golden age of imperial Rome effectively ended. The empire remained vast and wealthy, but the principled leadership that had defined the previous century gave way to instability, personal excess, and political decline. Still, the legacy of the 5 good emperors endured. They had shown that Rome could be governed not merely through power, but through wisdom, discipline, and duty. Their reigns represented a balance between central authority and civic responsibility, a golden standard to which future emperors would be compared. In the next and final chapter, we will trace the gradual decline of the Roman Empire, from the crises of the 3rd century through reforms and revivals to the eventual fall of the Western Empire and the endurance of its legacy. With the death of Marcus Aurelius in 180 CE, the Roman Empire began a slow and complex descent. Though still immense and formidable, it now faced challenges that no amount of military strength or administrative reform could permanently suppress. The Golden Age had passed, and what followed was an era of crises, transformations, and eventual fragmentation. The accession of Commodus, Marcus Aurelius's son, marked a sharp turn. Unlike his father, Commodus lacked discipline and a sense of duty. He preferred the spectacle of gladiatorial combat to the responsibilities of governance. His reign saw increasing corruption, reliance on favorites, and alienation of the Senate. Though not without some achievements, Commodus's erratic behavior and self-indulgence eroded the authority of the imperial office. He was assassinated in 192 CE, strangled in his bath by a wrestler. What followed was a new bout of instability. The year of the 5 emperors. Civil war, competing generals, and shifting allegiances tore through the empire. Eventually, Septimius Severus emerged victorious. He strengthened the role of the military in politics, raised soldiers' pay, and began to rely increasingly on military loyalty rather than senatorial support. The Severan dynasty would rule for several decades, but its foundations were fragile. The 3rd century CE brought what historians call the crisis of the 3rd century. Between 235 and 284 CE, the Roman Empire nearly collapsed under the weight of simultaneous disasters. Frequent changes of emperors, many of them assassinated, invasions by Germanic tribes and Persians, internal revolts, economic inflation, plague, and the breakdown of administrative coherence. At one point, the empire even split into three competing states: the Gallic Empire in the west, the Palmyrene Empire in the east, and the Central Roman Empire. Yet Rome did not fall. Out of the crisis rose a soldier emperor named Diocletian, who came to power in 284 CE. Realizing that the empire was too vast for one man to govern, he instituted the Tetrarchy, a system of two senior emperors, Augusti, and two junior emperors, Caesars, each ruling a quarter of the empire. Diocletian also undertook extensive reforms. He reorganized the provinces, stabilized the currency, and imposed strict price controls in an effort to halt inflation. Religiously, Diocletian is remembered for his persecution of Christians, the most severe in Roman history. His attempts to suppress the growing faith ultimately failed. Within a generation, Christianity would not only be tolerated, but embraced by the imperial office. After Diocletian's abdication in 305 CE, the Tetrarchy quickly unraveled. Civil wars resumed, and out of the chaos rose Constantine the Great. In 312 CE, Constantine defeated his rivals and became sole ruler of the Roman Empire. His reign marked a profound turning point in Roman and world history. Constantine embraced Christianity, ending persecution and issuing the Edict of Milan in 313 CE, which guaranteed freedom of worship throughout the empire. He convened the First Council of Nicaea in 325 CE to address doctrinal disputes and promote unity within the Church. Most famously, he founded a new capital, Constantinople, on the site of the ancient city of Byzantium. Strategically located and heavily fortified, Constantinople would become the heart of the Eastern Roman Empire for over 1,000 years. The 4th century was a time of transition. Christianity continued to spread, eventually becoming the state religion under Theodosius I. The empire remained powerful, but administrative burdens, cultural shifts, and economic strain persisted. After Theodosius's death in 395 CE, the empire was permanently divided into eastern and western halves, each with its own emperor. The Eastern Roman Empire, centered in Constantinople, would survive for nearly another millennium. But the Western Roman Empire entered a period of terminal decline. In the West, economic deterioration, weakening frontiers, and increasing reliance on barbarian mercenaries undermined imperial authority. Germanic tribes, previously settled as allies, began to act independently. In 410 CE, the Visigoths, led by Alaric, sacked Rome. It was the first time the Eternal City had fallen to an enemy in over 800 years. The shock was immense, though the empire still lingered on. Over the next decades, other tribes followed: Vandals, Suebi, Ostrogoths. Roman rule in Britain ended. Africa was lost. Gaul fragmented. The empire became a shell of its former self, a mosaic of warlords, local rulers, and imperial officials clinging to fading authority. The final blow came in 476 CE. A Germanic chieftain named Odoacer deposed the last Western Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus. Though the act was symbolic, real power had already passed. Historians traditionally mark it as the end of the Western Roman Empire. But Rome did not vanish. The Eastern Roman Empire, known today as the Byzantine Empire, continued. Roman law, language, and institutions endured in Constantinople, adapted to new realities. Christianity, once persecuted, now flourished as the empire's spiritual core. Culturally, Rome's influence remained immense. Its roads, cities, aqueducts, and monuments dotted the Mediterranean world. Its legal principles shaped future European systems. Its language evolved into the Romance tongues: Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian. Its ideas on governance, citizenship, and public service inspired generations to come. Rome was more than an empire. It was a civilizational framework. Though its political structure fell, its legacy endured, woven into the very fabric of the Western world. In the quiet of history, the story of Rome is not just one of rise and fall, but of transformation. From monarchy to republic, from republic to empire, from empire to legend, Rome shaped the world, and in many ways still does. Close your eyes now and rest. The legions have marched, the emperors have ruled, and the stones of the Forum remain under starlight, silent witnesses to the timeless echo of Rome.